Wellness has become one of the defining ideas shaping luxury today. But somewhere between the rituals, the supplements, and the retail, the meaning has started to blur, and it's not always clear whether we're actually getting healthier or just getting better at consuming the idea of health. My guest today is Loui Blake, co-founder of Long Lane, who's trying to cut through that noise. Long Lane is an alcohol-free wellness retreat in the English countryside that sits somewhere between hospitality, health, and community, designed around what they call boundless living. It's not a spa weekend or a members club. It's a more structural rethink of what hospitality is actually for: diagnostics, recovery, nature, an environment built to genuinely change how we feel, not just how we're entertained. He and his childhood friend Harrison have raised millions to build it, recruited a formidable team, and documented the entire process publicly, building an audience in the millions by being unusually direct about what they think modern wellness hotels get wrong and uncompromising about what integrity really requires. What makes the story compelling is that it's also personal. He's gone from chronic fatigue to running 7 ultramarathons in 7 days. So when he talks about transformation, he's also wrestling with the line between healing and optimization, between what we need and what we're endlessly trying to improve. Loui, welcome to What the Lux.
Thank you. What an amazing intro.
No worries. This is a great topic. One we're all pretty intrigued by from so many aspects. I think there's so many aspects. There's starting a business publicly, what you both went through before you started this, and of course, this idea of a new form of hospitality and wellness and how you're designing that. But let's just start on you and Harrison, your childhood friends, and you came together to build Long Lane. What made you realize you needed to do this together? What's the story?
So the story goes, obviously Harrison and I connected for a long time. We grew up in the same place, both from Norfolk. Yep. Both of us ended up living in New York, albeit at different times. And when we most recently met up in New York was around 4 years ago. And both of us were facing similar problems, wanting to be healthier, but finding that actually the opportunity to socialize in healthy spaces was limited to perhaps the gym or sports. And on a Friday night, on a Saturday night, those spaces didn't quite exist. And both of us have an entrepreneurial mindset. Harrison was working in finance at the time, but it has a very entrepreneurial outlook on things. I've had businesses since my teens. When you see a problem, you try and solve it. That's immediately where you go to, right? So we started this conversation around what would a space look like which had well-being integrated into the DNA of that space. And as more of our peers shift from a more hedonistic, alcohol-fueled social life, how do we shift the paradigm to one of health and well-being in a social context? So it started very much as an idea, a challenge, a question. And through a process of essentially thinking out loud in public on a social platform, we're able to outsource the ideation to the people that would eventually become the members and the users of the space. And the journey is essentially unfolded in front of us. I wouldn't say that I'd say we've been rather passive at some points. Yeah.
That's what we're going to talk most of today about. But I just want to get on to how bad was it? I mean, I think this chimes with a lot of people. I think a lot of people, they're kind of hedonistic back in their,
absolutely,
that stage of their life. It leads to a sort of emptiness and unhappiness, ill health, mental problems, whatever. We've all sort of been there, unless you're one of the people who can deal with wine and song all the time. What was happening?
Absolutely. I mean, it was for Harrison and I, it happened at different stages, at different times. So at the point that I mentioned 4 years ago, I'd kind of been through that process myself in my mid-20s. Harrison was then going through it. So he won't mind me saying that when I'd last seen him in the UK, athletic, footballer, looked relatively healthy. And the person that I saw in New York was not that same person. Skin was a different color. Skin was grey. He was a bit chubby. He's not here, so I can say that. Drinking a lot and pretty unhappy, giving the external view of his life, earning great money, living in New York City, nice restaurants, nice holidays, nice clothes, etc. Was very unhappy. And I'd had a similar experience some years previously. So going back to 2016, I was working in London. I had a recruitment company in the daytime, had a nightlife business in the evening, working all hours, excessive drinking, and everything else that goes with that, lack of sleep, poor diet, trying to exercise here and there. But ultimately, I was a slave to my own impulses and felt a lack of control over my life to the extent that I'd wake up most Sundays and psychologically be in a lot of trouble because I was full of regret and shame for what had happened the night before. But equally, my body was super run down. I had low energy, chronic fatigue constantly. It was a real struggle to even get into work on the Monday. And it had to get bad enough for me to really make a change because I was stuck in this cycle. For me, stepping out of that completely, changing the environment, I moved back home to Norfolk. I went through shall we say, a journey in the jungle, shall we say, with psychedelics. And it gave me a complete 180, a complete fresh perspective on not only how I was treating myself, but how I was treating other people. And actually the way that I was treating myself and my body was indicative of how I was treating others as well. Lack of respect, a lack of love and a lack of care, which was ultimately rooted in fear of and disconnection from myself ultimately. And really seeking validation constantly in the outside world. And that fear and that seeking was numbed by alcohol and being around other people and drugs and everything else. And it reached a point where it was just, something had to change. I
suppose there's a certain paradox here in that as humans, we need the social aspect and community aspect of life. There's an element of going out, seeing people. And that was happening as sort of vaguely, I suppose, happens in vaguely toxic environments if you're also wanting to look after your health. How does Long Lane fix that? I think you describe it as a home for boundless living, not a hotel or a members club. So what's the difference?
I think that for us, alcohol is a fantastic catalyst for connection, at least in the moment, right? It helps to bring us closer together with other people. But the consequence is that the next day or days later, the physical impact is negative. And very often the ability to control the experience in the moment is limited, right? Because beyond a certain point, we're out of control. And so we're looking to replace that catalyst with something more positive that facilitates a more meaningful and a deeper connection in the moment, but also leaves you with a compounding benefit thereafter, from a health perspective, from a relationship perspective. And the feeling is that these third spaces between work and home typically are unhealthy. And whether that's the alcohol's present, whether it's the materials, the air quality, the water quality, the way that our body interacts with those environments, which are typically man-made false environments with negative inputs, e.g. chemicals, alcohol, etc., we have to sacrifice our physical well-being to satisfy our social well-being. And we know that social relationships are such a high driver of longevity and quality of life that we shouldn't have to make that decision choosing between social health or physical health. So the intention really is to create a space where social health flourishes in symbiosis with physical health.
And how does that happen? How have you designed it? What's the sort of core pillars? You said you had other members help design it, or did you come with some sort of founding principles?
Yeah, I think the way I've approached it, typically the way all of us approach businesses, and certainly I've done in the past, is that you build something that solves your own problem, and then you try and market it to other people. And what we decided to do with this one was, well, why don't we try and involve people in the process of deciding what this space becomes, because ultimately they're the people that are going to use it. And so when we're making decisions, we're making these decisions publicly and explaining our thinking behind why we're making certain decisions. So if you look at it from the ground up, right, let's talk about the infrastructure. So many spaces that we spend time in are not conducive to a healthy energy state of being, right? So LED lights that if you slow it right down, it's a constant flashing, which triggers a stress response. Poor air quality, non-organic fabrics, poor water quality. All of these inputs that interact with our biology set us up for a stressful state of being. So just in terms of the fabric of the space, can we optimize for natural, breathable products? Can we optimize for exceptional air quality, water quality, reduced EMF exposure, lighting that aligns with circadian rhythm? So this forms the shape of the space. And then within the space, can we make this a personal experience for the individual? Because you and I, whilst we're both human, will have unique individual biology, and both of us will have different needs at different times. So how do we understand and resolve for those individual needs? And then in community, how do we facilitate connection between people where alcohol isn't present? So through beverage, this could be through different adaptogens, different herbs, etc. But it can also be through how spaces are curated and hosted, right? We can't expect everyone to show up in a bar, there be no alcohol present, and then everyone suddenly to start striking up conversation. I'm not great at that. There's a few people I know that are great at striking up conversation randomly. But sometimes if we can have that space hosted by people, if we can have the design of the space such that you end up sitting with people, if we can still bring in sound and light and these other things that can make the space one that facilitates that connection, we can hope to achieve a different paradigm. And this is what we're still trying to solve for. We don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's resonated to such an extent. It's because we're not standing here on a pedestal saying, hey, look at us, we've got it all figured out. We're setting an intention, we're setting a path forward, and we're inviting people in to collaborate on how that comes about. And that's very much been the energy that we're trying to solve this problem for ourselves. Yeah. We know there's people that also have the same challenges and problems. Let's collectively try and solve for this. And the beauty of it is I don't know where we're going to end up. I don't know what that final form is.
Yeah, the bit about fostering social engagement without kind of being fueled by alcohol or whatever, or music, and I suppose music still applies, but certainly without alcohol. Have you got any hints of what you think will work to kind of create the vibe, the ability to randomly meet someone and have a great conversation?
Well, I think about, think from your own experience, right? Certainly I can think from my own, is that what are the reasons that I wouldn't perhaps engage someone in conversation? And a lot of it is around fear of judgment.
Totally.
Fear of judgment, fear of how we're perceived. So if I can support people in dropping into a space where they feel safe to be themselves, safe to be seen. And I think about the times where I felt the most safe to communicate and not being judged. It's when I've been conscious of a shared openness of the other people in the room. It's when conversations have been facilitated and I've got to really see someone for who they are. And I would argue that actually being drunk is the opposite of that for the most part, right? So I think a lot of it is down to the opportunity presented by one, having a members space, because ultimately you're safe in the knowledge that these people have been through an application process and therefore been deemed as someone who should belong to this space through their interests, their values, etc. But equally, having the spaces really well hosted and connected, I think that's a strong role. So a role that we will have is literally like that of a connector.
Yes.
People in these spaces are actively bringing people together and seeding conversation and literally building those connections.
And you think it's all about the physical design of the space? That must be interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
because they're always built around a bar.
There's no straight lines in nature.
Yeah.
So there's also like an element of how do we design to allow for people to naturally come together? What's that journey through the space? Now, we're of course taking a property that's 200 years old and is listed. So we're working with an existing structure, albeit within that structure, we can design to allow for a fluidity which isn't currently present in the shell that's there.
Yeah, and I should say this is a beautiful country house in Sussex in the south of the UK. So that's what we're in the countryside, aren't we?
And just by default, being in the countryside, we know, and it's proven, that being immersed in nature downregulates our nervous system, gives us a feeling of safety and security and connection. So bringing the outside in, but also making the outside visible. So we've got these lovely big glass windows. We've got a whole greenhouse, which is just full. It's like a jungle. It will be like a jungle. So I think really, all of these biohacks that we see, when I talk about air quality, water quality, etc., what we're trying to do is mimic nature. All of the best biohacks start in nature. So we're trying to bring nature back in and reestablish that connection, that understanding that we function as part of nature, not separate from it.
And can you just talk about who is the Long Lane member? What are the criteria going to be for membership?
So interesting, isn't it? Because in the UK, we have this obsession with members clubs.
Yes.
It's more than 200 clubs.
Yeah.
And whilst historically there's been clubs centered around art, writing, etc., I think in recent years, clubs have been built on status and wealth. And the prerequisite for our club is simply a prioritization of health and well-being. So this isn't defined by a specific demographic, an age range, a background, an industry. It's those that consider their health and well-being to be of their primary importance in their life. To the extent that the things that they care about, the things that we also care about. So I've been the the awkward customer in a restaurant that's inquired as to whether the pans are they non-stick or are they cast iron? Are your cleaning products organic or non-organic? I'm interacting with these surfaces and this has an impact on my own gut microbiome. I want to understand. Waitresses look at you like you've lost your mind. Probably people that are asking similar questions. The great balance between Harrison and I is I'm quite far down this rabbit hole. Harrison's dipping his toe in so he can speak to people who are, yeah, I'm interested, I'm not sure, let me come and see. But ultimately what connects those people, whether you consider yourself someone who's, you're down the rabbit hole, you're doing your blood testing, you're really into the space, or you're someone that's simply trying to drink less, it's about an intention around health and well-being and the priority and how that shows up in your life. So that's kind of how we're thinking about membership.
Yeah, so really not be a captain of industry. You don't have to be this or that, the other. It's about your mindset towards that topic.
For sure.
And just talk us through what a typical day at Long Lane might be like. Obviously, you haven't opened yet, but tell us what you're looking for. People
this
be interested.
This has been my visualization exercise throughout, right? I think, it's important as a founder, you're building something, being able to constantly return to a vision of what the thing you're building will look like when it's built, and literally being able to smell the smells, hear the sounds, visually walk through that space. I would start my day in a natural pool. I like getting in cold water pretty early in the day. Doing that with a group of people, getting into the cold, getting out, having some nice breakfast, going for a walk in the forest, going for a training session in the gym, finishing the sauna, perhaps a game of paddle in the afternoon, spending some time on the farm, eating my lunch on the farm in the greenhouse.
Are you allowed to work?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, some creative work in the afternoon in the library.
Yeah.
Getting around the fire in the evening and having some amazing conversation. Going to lie in a tree net in the forest in the late evening and getting to bed in front of my red light panel, winding down and getting to bed in the forest in one of the cabins. I think the great thing about the space, is that it caters for lots of different customer journeys. Let's say that somebody's coming along and they want to go hard, recover hard, eat well, hang out. We've got that covered. You want to come and do a 3-day detox protocol. We've got that covered for you. You want to come get some deep work done in one of the cabins in the woodland. We've got that. So caters for lots of different people, whether you're a member and you're coming for the day, whether you're a hotel guest and you're staying for 3 days. Really, there's lots of different journeys that can be achieved there.
Yeah. It's interesting. How far do you let technology into the experience? There's obviously, there's technology in the wellness area, and then there's just general technology in the sort of hospitality spaces. I
think a lot about this marriage between ancient modalities and modern technology. And I think often technology serves to give efficacy to things that we've known have worked for such a long time.
Yeah.
And there's people that will accept and have first-hand experience and be able to intuit their belief in those things. And there's others that need it to be proven. So I think the tracking, the diagnostics, whether that's through periodic testing or whether that's a daily tracker, are valuable because they can serve to demonstrate to the individual, hey, look, the impact on your HRV, the impact on your resting heart rate, etc., as a result of these experiences. But I think it's down to the individual. I always try and shift people back towards intuition.
Yeah. I
think these tools are useful to give us data to be able to understand what feels good, because I think we've come so far away from that. But ultimately, as I said earlier, the best biohacks are nature, right? My favorite practice is a sauna.
Yes.
The detoxification benefits of being in a sauna 4 to 5 times a week are incredible. Exercise, trail run rather than a treadmill for me.
Yeah.
Breath work in a group over sitting in an oxygen chamber, as an example. Although we have those things there for the people that want them. But I think one thing I will say with the technology is that diagnostics changed my life and changed my health. Or changed my life as a result of changing my health. And what I mean by that is by doing periodic blood testing and having a DNA test as a baseline, being equipped with that data allows me to ensure that I'm eating the right foods and taking the right supplements that are unique to my biology. So one of the pieces of technology that we will use is a genetic test when people join, if they so wish. And that genetic data, that DNA methylation test, will inform the menu that they see in the main restaurant. So they can, when they scan the menu, they can see foods that are appropriate for their individual genetic profile. And we can help to guide people on the foods that are most beneficial to them, and indeed the nutrients that they may struggle to get more of and potentially need to supplement.
So clever. When you say scan, how will that come
So
to life
a
for them?
methylation test is just a cheek swab. It's a DNA test.
But when you go into the restaurant and you're there, you literally with a QR code scanning it.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you partnering with other companies to deliver some of these more scientific solutions?
Yes. Yeah, of course. So we have a partner on the clinical side, and we have some various partners on the testing side. Different tests that we would like to offer. So a DNA methylation test is one. This is essentially a genetic map of the body. A blood test, which is a series of blood markers which show different micronutrient levels. VO2 max testing, which is a key indicator of longevity. And then what's most important is a functional doctor interpretation. So a human that can tell you what all of that data, when it's amalgamated, actually means. But downstream of that, we'll also have an app that amalgamates that data and can give you daily insights based on also connecting up your wearable or your 8-sleep mattress or the various other kind of data points that you want to include. There'll be people that go for this and that want to put all the data in and be guided. There'll be other people that say, you know what, I'm going to go on feeling. And there'll be people in between. It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And so we're not saying, hey, you have to do all of this. We're saying, do what feels right for you. And we're here to facilitate that.
So it sounds like on that spectrum of, we always say lab to linen coat, or lab coat to linen, or science and spirituality. It sounds like you're somewhere in the middle with an open mindset, basically.
Correct.
And you'll adapt to people, but you're never going to go really far in one direction.
And I do both, right? Like for me, meditation, journaling, these are practices that fundamentally changed my life.
Yeah.
But so has doing regular blood work.
Yeah.
So I don't want to essentially take a reductionist view that spirituality is great and longevity is bad. Again, I don't like the word longevity because it suggests that we're optimizing for a future event as opposed to just focusing on being well today, and longevity is a byproduct of that anyway. But what I mean to say is that the two aren't mutually exclusive. The two interests can coexist, and I think that's important.
Is this something you can still make relatively accessible, or is it going to have a very high price point?
Yes, I can talk about price points. So I was a member for Soho House for years, and I kept my membership purely to be able to use Soho Farmhouse.
Yeah.
And I probably went 3 times a year, 4 times a year. And I believe there's plenty of people in London that would like access to a country club that they can go out to on weekends or midweek perhaps. And so what we've included is a country club tier in our membership, which is £100 a month. And it gives the member 25 visits per year to go out and use the club and all of the events and amenities, etc., that are included in that, but also being part of that member network and the added benefits to that. And then our typical membership is £250 a month, which
is comparable
with a third space and even a David Lloyd in some of the regional spaces, but what we believe to be much more advanced level of service. And we do have a top tier membership, which is slightly more expensive than that, which includes a suite of testing and a functional doctor support system throughout the year, which we've seen a pretty high uptake in so far from our founding membership base, actually.
Yeah. And are you thinking this could scale to other countries or other regions?
That's certainly the intention, yeah. I think for us, locations that are within an hour to 90 minutes outside of a major city in a natural setting.
Yeah.
So, where we are now in the South Downs National Park, beautiful. Similar topographies outside major cities where there's a similar degree of interest in health and wellness. Like London is a city that is very interested in health and well-being. And so I think despite the fact that we're clearly not in London, being in close proximity to London and helping people to get out to the countryside, even if we did nothing else, we just took people out, most of our acreage is forest, woodland, getting people into the woodlands, getting people back into nature, and getting out of the city for the day. There's a huge benefit to health for that.
Yeah. And can you just talk about how public this has, we talked about a bit at the beginning, how public this has been in its construction. Was that deliberate? Was that organic? What was behind that?
Yeah, it was deliberate. It's not been easy because we've shared essentially everything. I think there's a reluctance to be vulnerable on social. Again, I spoke earlier about the feeling of trying to appease people, to be validated socially. Going on camera and talking about your failures is inconsistent with that human need to be part of the tribe, right? But what we found is that if we want to really involve people in the journey, we have to be honest, and we have to be real about where we are. I think also potentially in the past, I've had other businesses and I've talked about the successes and celebrated that when things have gone well. But in doing so, and not mentioning the difficulties, I've been part of painting a picture of entrepreneurship which is largely unrealistic, and it's bloody hard. I describe it as a spiritual experience because it's all of our insecurities coming to the surface and being highlighted. Now, you push that further and you do it online in public view, and you set yourself up for people asking you every time you see them, "Oh, how's Long Lane going? How's Long Lane going?"
Yeah.
And if you're at a stage where it's not going particularly well, everyone's seen it, you know? So it's kept us accountable, and it's been fun, and it's been explorative. How much do we share? And we shared a lot. Hopefully, much of it has been informative and constructive to people that are starting their own business. I love entrepreneurship. I'd love for everyone to have the experience of starting a business, running a business, bringing an idea to life. It gets me going. I think it's amazing. So if any element of what we've shared has inspired people to do the same, I think the world's a better place for these ideas coming into existence. So
this is a podcast obviously about luxury. I have to ask this question.
Sure.
What for you is your definition of luxury, and is Long Lane indeed a luxury concept?
Yeah, I mean, we were having this conversation very recently around historically luxury, for me at least, has been indulgence. It's been really actually rooted in self-love, I think. And there's negative connotations of luxury, whether it's performative or it's ego-driven. But ultimately, I think, you know, when you engage with a luxury brand, let's say, you're doing so from a place of self-expression, but equally from self-love. You're putting a beautifully tailored jacket on, or you're staying in a wonderful hotel or a fantastic restaurant. I think how we're treating ourselves and how we're expressing love for ourselves is shifting into things that make us feel good, as opposed to things that simply look good to the outside world. And I think that's where luxury strayed for a while. And that now is more focused around how it directly impacts our health and well-being. I think that was potentially a benefit that wasn't considered before. But now I think it's a primary driver for many people, that status has changed from simply being wealth or access, and is now shifting towards how healthy we are. And this can go too far, perhaps, in some regards, in terms of competitions around biomarkers and biological age and all that stuff. But ultimately, I think it's how we feel. And how we feel,
Which behaviours or expectations from the next generation of luxury clients feels most consequential for the future of your industry?
I would say that the young generations are certainly drinking a lot less, and they have a higher expectation of what's on offer, generally, broadly speaking, because of their exposure to global trends and spaces. So somebody growing up in Manchester, let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the basis of comparison would have been other locations in Manchester and perhaps the north of England. Now they're seeing these amazing concepts from New York, LA, Mexico. And so they're holding these spaces to a higher standard based on what they're exposed to globally.
What forms of innovation, technical, cultural, organisational, do you think luxury brands have been too slow to adopt?
I think luxury brands are being held to account on transparency on supply chain and sustainability to a much higher extent than ever before. Young generations care a lot more about not necessarily just what they're buying, but the story behind it, where it comes from. And they're a generation they're almost exhausted from the news around climate, etc. But that still becomes an important thing of importance. So I think luxury in the past has been, as we said, very much about expression, but from the perspective of status. And I think that status is now more closely linked to being less about someone who puts himself on a pedestal because of their access, their affordability, and more someone who wants to build status through being mindful, being careful, being being culturally and environmentally aware, let's say.
Yeah.
I think those things become more important.
What keeps on driving you to start these businesses or take on these audacious challenges, whether it's sort of ultra marathons or long lane or the stuff you've done before? What do you think's in you? Because it's not in everyone, and I think people are always interested to hear what's the sort of spur that gets you going on this stuff.
I think, going deep for a moment, if I may.
Yeah.
The purpose that I can attach to experience generally is to know ourselves. And I get to know myself through exposure to challenge and difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that part of being human is to be creative. We're not simply passive in this experience. We are simultaneously creating and experiencing our reality. So I want to see the extent to which I can create in the external world in order to then experience the external world that I've created. And all of the ventures that I've been in are spaces that I want to exist in the world and I want to experience myself. And so by creating them, I get to experience them and I get to know myself in that process and understand myself. Because when you're pushing and you're meeting the edge of your capacity is when you really get to know and understand yourself. Ultramarathons are a great example. You're going to hit a limit in that race where you physically cannot continue. And I'm looking for the internal narrative that's telling me to stop and where that's coming from. That's an exploration. And if I can separate myself from the experience to the extent that I can almost witness that coming up, I get to see who I am in that moment. We can all be nice, sat here like this, chatting, etc. But how do you respond when there's crisis, when there's trauma, that's where I want to get to. And I think if we can practice that, we're better equipped to be able to deal with those situations when they show up in our everyday life versus this idea of being comfortably numb, of just seeking safety and convenience at all ends, which essentially means that we are passive in the experience.
Yeah. Wow, I can't ask any more questions after that. I think that's a good wrap. That's a brilliant answer. We do, though, ask, Loui, thank you. We do ask the same 4 questions to our guests
Sure.
at the end of the podcast. If it's all right, I'm gonna go for it. The first one is, what would you most like to change about your industry? And I suppose in this context, we're talking about wellness and hospitality.
I've played a role in this. So this isn't me slamming hospitality operators. And we're all working on very difficult margins. It's very difficult to make a hospitality business work, at least in the UK at the moment. But we have a complaint around attracting talent into the industry.
Yeah.
And a lack of people wanting these jobs. I wouldn't want that job. So one of the things we're thinking about with Long Lane is, how can we create a work environment that people actually want to be a part of and belong to? And I think this kind of work is going to become more in demand owing to its human nature.
Post AI. Yeah.
Yes. So with Long Lane, I'm thinking, and this is in process, but offering mentoring and coaching, around different themes, finance, mindset, etc. Offering the same diagnostic process we offer to our members. So health being covered. Wearable, should they wish. If somebody comes in with a red recovery, I'm saying go home or do this protocol. And having shared success as far as financial remuneration, the overall success of the project to come closer to it. These different levers that we can pull to rethink organizational structure and support for people that are playing that role in the business, particularly when we're thinking about health and wellness, because I want that individual who is the first line with customers to be a representative of our brand ethos. I can't ask somebody to show up and serve a customer that it's all about health and well-being if they're not experiencing a high level of health and well-being. And the opportunity now with AI is to really recruit great talent into this space.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure it's somewhere that we'd want to work as well.
Yeah. Understood.
It's incredibly expensive to employ people now, and high risk for operators. So I think that change isn't just down to operators like myself, but we need to rethink employment law in this country.
Yeah, I mean, generally they're basically killing the hospitality sector.
Yeah.
Slowly each month.
Yes.
And I think it's beginning to get some public awareness, thank God. Second question is, what most concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation?
Addiction. which manifests now in technology addiction. It's something that, I'm 36. I'm pretty mindful, but I'm susceptible as anyone is to spending too much time in technology.
Yeah.
And I notice that my ability to sit with myself, to be present with my family and friends is inhibited by heightened use of these devices.
Yeah.
And what I see is that I don't have children, so it's very difficult for me to comment in terms of how parents use technology to placate children. But I think if we're training young people to spend hours on devices in these short attention loops and exposing them to catastrophic news from across the world every single day, I think we're going to be in a very challenging place with those people as they grow up. So technology and use of technology, particularly social media apps, concerns me. When I was young, your basis of comparison for everything was the people you went to school with, maybe. A couple of boys are better at football than you.
Yeah.
A couple of people that had nicer holidays, maybe, but that was it. Now your basis of comparison is the whole world, and very often it's fake.
Yeah.
And I think not even just for kids, but for young people. An 18-year-old's thinking, well, I should be a multimillionaire that has an Instagram girlfriend and that goes to Dubai 5 times a year. Yeah. It's just like that. It's not reality, There's
something so interesting. I think the really young kids now are going to be lucky because I think people are waking up to this.
I agree.
And they're going to be quite controlled in that one. It's the sandwich generation between the early adopters and probably now.
I mean, my generation, we had dial-up internet and MSN Messenger.
Yeah.
And then perhaps some social apps around like Bebo and MySpace and things like that.
Yeah.
And then obviously Facebook. But, you weren't, it was on a computer. You weren't carrying it around in your pocket, Now it's relentless. I'm using a blocker. I use an app called Opal. So I have a 30-minute limit per day that I can log into my social apps. Harrison does something quite cool, which he only uses Instagram on his laptop. And it doesn't have the same effect. You don't scroll in the same way.
You haven't got that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a few little techniques. I interviewed TJ Power recently, who's a neuroscientist. He's a great guy. And he has a lot of really great strategies for how to kind of avoid incessant use, but it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
An ultimate question. If you had to give up your job tomorrow, so give up this, what would you do? I think I know the answer, but...
I flirt with the idea often of doing nothing, to be honest.
Okay, no, wasn't expecting that.
I think,
what is doing nothing?
I think, I play with this idea of the goal is to have no goals. So somewhere within my ambition, and I'm perhaps going against what I said earlier, there is something that I'm trying to achieve, something which suggests that I am not complete as I am. So I would challenge myself, and I think this is what I'm most scared of. Can I sit? That scares me more than taking on a venture.
So sort of manifesting your full Alan Watts, or sort of
can I go in? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah,
because all I've ever done is build, create. Like I think the longest holiday I've taken is like I took 2 weeks a couple of years ago to go to Colombia, and I was working in between, doing calls in between. But what would come out of taking a prolonged period of not doing anything? And I definitely don't want to do that at the moment because I love what I'm doing. But at some point, I'd like to see what would come out of that.
It's quite a scary prospect
for a lot
of people. It's probably
we're talking. I always think this when the idea of going to sit with psychedelics for me, I don't find. I respect the process, and of course it's scary, but I'm happy to go there and reveal myself and be exposed to it. Vipassana, on the other hand, or a dark retreat, for example.
So being still, looking inwards.
That really scares me. I mean, I'm a meditator, but 12 days of not speaking, and 6 hours of meditation at a time, or 3 days in silent darkness. I mean, that scares me. That scares me.
Me too. I don't want to meet myself either. The last question, what's the most exciting thing for you in the next 5 years?
I think we're really returning back to, I think in many respects, we've reached the precipice of this hyper-connected digital experience in many respects, and the pendulum is swinging back the other way. And the value that we're now placing on in-person, very human, much slower experiences is growing day by day. And people are looking for that. People are exploring that. People are creating those.
Yeah.
It's like a return almost. And that's exciting. You know, you see the movement around Whole Foods as an example, the movement around getting out into nature, the movement around tech-free zones and phone-free spaces and coming away. Yeah, I just think that like that whole space is so interesting, right? Because we've realized that really is what works.
Yeah.
And having that imbalance, technology is great. It's fantastic. Some of the, you know, we've been able to solve many things. The standard of living globally has never been higher in documented history. Perhaps there was a few versions of humans that were killed out many times before, but in the history that we know, this is the best standard of living that anyone's ever had. So let's not lose the technology, but let's try and use it in a way that facilitates more time to be human.
Yeah. Well, Long Lane plays very well to that. And also thank you today. That was such a deep and thoughtful conversation.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Loui.
Thanks.